What's going on, guys? It's Dean here, and in this video we're going to set up OpenAI's embeddings model with Pinecone's database with Bubble. And this basically allows us to ingest our own data, whether it's personal information or company docs, whatever it may be. We're essentially going to turn that data into Pinecone's database that we can then later use as context in our prompts. Now, in this tutorial, this isn't going to be, we're not going to be leveraging any GPT models that to use this as context, but this is, again, we're just kind of working on the process of just ingesting the data and then using a similarity search. So if we come back really quick to this UI, it's a very simple UI I created. And again, this is just for to kind of relay the concepts of this, but we can feed it data. For example, we can say something very specific. So we can say, my favorite NFL team is the Kansas City Chiefs. So basically what we can do, what this is doing kind of behind the hood, is we're ingesting this straight into Pinecone. We're turning it into embeddings and then storing that in Pinecone, and then we can ask it a very specific question. So we can say, what is my favorite NFL team? And it's just going to return the metadata, which is this. So like I said, we're not plugging this into another prompt with GPT-3 or 4. We're simply just returning the metadata. But this is essential so you can see here, we have the same kind of input that we put there. And then if we ask something else, so we can say, how many months are in a year, for example. It should not either return null or just not return anything. You can see obviously it didn't change the state, which means there's nothing to return. So again, this is just a very simple kind of understanding of how we're turning our input and ingesting it into embeddings. But obviously, if you have this down, you can really do a lot with this. So for example, you could then use this as context in helping answer your user's prompts, for example. Now there's other concepts as well, such as like chunking and few shot prompts. I'm not going to get into that. I have a video actually going on kind of the concepts with a framework called LangChain, and that essentially helps solve a lot of the limitations that are with large language models such as GPT-3 and 4. So definitely check that out. There's also a ton of other content on YouTube that goes pretty thoroughly in depth with it. But for now, we're just going to look at the simple ingestion of how we can, take our input and, do a similarity search on the query as well. So I'd say the first thing that we're going to want to do is set up our API calls, and I'm actually going to do this step by step with you guys because I know it can get a little bit finicky setting all of that up just with the data formats and kind of all of the objects that are returned. And if you guys come into this plugins little nav bar item here, make sure you have the API connector installed obviously, and then we'll just take a look at the two different API calls that we're going to the endpoints that we're going to hit, and I would just separate them. But if we click expand, you can see the first one is going to be the OpenAI embeddings, and you can easily get this, you can easily import this curl request if you just come into OpenAI's documentation into the embeddings guide, and then simply just copy this curl request. And then if you come back into Bubble, you can simply click this little import right above the add other call, and then you can just paste that in, and it should dynamically input everything. Now, you are going to want to obviously add your own API key. You can get this from OpenAI just from signing up with an account. and make sure that you guys set up your embeddings as an action, because I think by default it's going to be displayed as data, but if it's an action, you can actually use it in your workflow. Otherwise, you won't be able to. And then, get your OpenAI key, and then make sure to add this input, make it a dynamic value, because obviously this is going to be what the what the user inputs here. In our case, it was what's my favorite NFL team, for example. And then you want to make sure you have private unclicked as well, and then you just want to reinitialize the call, and then you can even see kind of the embeddings object that it gives us. And guys, this is also 1,536 different dimensions, which is just mind-blowing. You don't have to really know how this is done. Again, OpenAI handles all of this, but essentially our goal with this is to store this data, this embedding, into Pinecone. So yeah, when you generate that, make sure you also click save. That way you don't have that kind of red arrow hanging above here that's saying it's not initialized. So once you have that, that one's pretty easy to set up. We'll just go ahead and collapse this one all together. And then again, just create another one. So click add another API call. Create one with Pinecone, expand that, and then for Pinecone, you want to just sign up with a Pinecone account. Very simple to do so, and I believe on their free tier they might have like a wait list right now. I think it's like a day or two, unless you pay and get on the upgraded plan. But I think again, it's pretty simple to do so, but and it's pretty quick as well. But once you have your account created, you just want to essentially create a new index. So this is like we're creating a new database in a sense. If you create that new index, you can call it whatever you want. I called it bubble embeddings. And then from there, I'm not actually going to create this, but for the dimensions, make sure you put in 1536. So again, this is just what OpenAI uses to kind of, or Pinecone uses to, match the similarity search, the semantic search. And then we'll just do cosine as our metric. You don't need to change this. Again, this is just recommended by OpenAI. You don't really need to know what any of this means. And then for the pod type, either one works. But once you create that, you're going to have an index like this. It's going to take some time to initialize. I guess once that's created, we can actually go ahead and add our, our API calls. So the first thing we're going to want to do is the upsert method. So this is where we're actually ingesting our data. So if we come back to this little Figma I created, this is essentially where we're taking once our input, which is here, once that's converted into the embeddings, we're essentially trying to store this in Pinecone's database. So that's called the upsert method. And then if you just click this little drop down here, we can get that same exact curl command that we got with OpenAI, but with Pinecone. If you just want to go ahead and click copy that, and then come back into our API connector, and then just import another call here, and then paste that, which is where you'll get this. Now, before you guys change any of the values, let's just go ahead and initialize it, because it can get, again, like I said, it can get a little bit finicky when we're just with the data formats and everything. So just go ahead and click reinitialize call. And then, again, you're going to see it's going to return us what was upserted. So again, just means we're storing that vector into Pinecone itself. So just click save on that. And then once you do, you can actually just go ahead and delete the, delete the actual, the vectors it gave us in the curl request. So this array of zeros here, it's a lot. It's 1,536 dimensions. You can just go ahead and delete that, and then add an object like this with a key value pair. So text as the key, and then text as the value as well. And again, this is basically what we're gonna take from the text is what we're gonna take from here, essentially the vector that's created from our query. So make sure you guys have the dynamic values for these set, and then again, values. So this text is essentially, we're storing the metadata when we upsert this into Pinecone. This text is just going to be this metadata here, which is the user's query. So in our case, it was what our favorite NFL team is. And then the values, this is just going to be this that was returned back by OpenAI. So now you can kind of see this kind of all come together. In the namespace, that's just kind of like a title for what we're calling our ingestion, essentially. So again, make sure that was obviously initialized before you start changing any of these, just because it is kind of a pain in the ass to change all of that later on. But essentially, once you have that all set up, the last one you're going to want to do is the actual query. And again, make sure you just import another call. And if we just come back into Pinecone's console, into the query command, we can see the curl request again, and then just go ahead and copy that and come back to your API connector, import that, and then you should get this. So again, make sure you change these, and as well as this one too, is to actions, otherwise you won't be able to use it. And then before you guys go ahead and change any of this in the body, just go ahead and initialize it and save it, just to save you time. So because if you don't initialize it, it's still, for some reason, it doesn't let you use it in the workflows. It's pretty annoying if you ask me, but that's just bubble on their end. But obviously, so again, change these to dynamic values, and then make sure that you have these parameters set is true as well. I think by default they're false, so make sure you have these. Otherwise, we won't be able to get back our request, our metadata, our query that we wanna see. So I think by then we're all set up. Make sure that these are all unchecked from private as well, so we can access these body parameters in our workflow. So I guess the next important thing is to go into our workflows. And also one thing to make sure with is I just had a shared header for both of these requests. You can obviously see we have an ingestion and a query request that we created. I just had a shared header with the API key and the content type. You can also have it in each individual one, but I've just for organization's sake, I've noticed it's cleaner that way. But yeah, now we can actually kind of jump into the workflows. So if we go, the first one we'll look at is the actual ingestion. And again, this is where we're taking the inputs, whatever the user's inputting here in this field. So in our case, it was my favorite team, NFL team, is the Kansas City Chiefs. And then we're essentially turning that into embeddings, and then straight from there, we're putting that into Pinecone's ingestion. Now, again, you can actually look at kind of how all these calls are being created in Pinecone's documentation. I definitely recommend you guys check through that, but you can kind of see what's really happening behind the hood when you insert data, the different kind of key value pairs, as well as it just gives you more context. I definitely recommend you guys check it out. But you should have access to these for body parameters. For the ID, this is just a unique ID string that we're creating. So just click calculate. I believe it's calculate a formula or something. Yeah, calculate formula. Once you have that, you just want to generate a random string. It can be whatever length of characters you want. Use a mix of letters and numbers. This is just what they require on their end, and for organization's sake. But for the namespace, we can call this whatever we want. We're just going to hard code this as test for now. And then for the actual text, so this is the metadata from our input value. So we're just storing that as text, and this is going to be the metadata essentially. So again, that same value from here. And then most importantly, the values here. So this value is going to be what we're storing from OpenAI's embeddings from step one. So whatever is returned back from here, that very long array of one-dimensional array of vectors, we're essentially make sure you have this set up to each item's embedding. And if you actually just go back into OpenAI's docs, and if you see like the example response, you can even see you can see exactly kind of what's returned. So we can see we're going to get each item's embedding. So each one of these all the way up to 1536 dimensions. And then, yeah, so once that's kind of set up, now we have the ingestion complete. So if you just come back and query it, you should be able to, preview and query and ingest the data. So if we come into Pinecone's console and then we come down to this index info, we should be able to see the namespace that we created, test, and then also the number of vectors. Again, I've done this several times. That's why it shows 5. But yours, if you've only done it once, you only ingest data once, it's only going to show 1. And yeah, so again, guys, this namespace is essentially, this is how we kind of organize our data, our ingestions. There's also metadata as well. You can use kind of either one, and I'm not going to get too into it, but I know obviously if you want to develop a more robust application, for example, you would separate, for example, each namespace with a user or with metadata. So for example, whatever the logged in user is, you would use that namespace so they can access their own data. No one else can access it but them. There's several ways to do that. But yeah, so once we have the ingestion phase complete, if you come into ask a question, this is essentially this input here, really quick, really simple there. But if we come back in, we're doing that same exact process. So if I come back into my little Figma design here, we can see where we have the query input. Again, we're putting that again into OpenAI embedding. So for example, in our example was, what's my favorite NFL team? So again, we're taking this question, this query, this prompt, and converting it again into a one-dimensional vector, which again, this is just, and I should have said this earlier from the start, but this is essentially how computers can do like similarity searches with one another, because traditionally, like if you just gave a computer this phrase, it would have no idea what the hell any of these words or context mean. So basically it turns it into embeddings, which is handled by OpenAI, and from this embeddings it can find out what's most similar. So now you can kind of see, I hope this is kind of wrapping around your head a little bit more, but you can essentially see now that we're going to compare the two vectors, and then once whatever is the closest match. Now obviously we only did one kind of ingestion, but whatever's the closest match, it's going to find that and then return the metadata of that closest match, which is the query that the user put, which is, my favorite NFL team is the Chiefs. So I guess we can keep going, but essentially once we have that input query's value embedded, and then we're going to query that Pinecone, our Pinecone database. So again, this is that last API call we set up here. We're essentially querying that. Which one are we querying? We're querying the test namespace, and then we're querying it with the embeddings that was returned back from that step. And then here we're just changing the state. So whatever I have a text field down here. We're essentially just changing the state of that to and make sure you have this set up properly as well. But that's the element. I made a quick custom state here, back really quick into our editor. You can see I made if we just click it here, I made a custom state, just called it completion. set it as text. And then if we just come back into our workflow, I have the Pinecone queries matches each item's metadata text and the first item. So again, you're not going to have the metadata if you don't specify in the API connector to set these values to true. I think by default it's not going to do that, but essentially this is how we get the result back. This is like what the user sees, what we saw, which is that same exact query that we put, so that metadata. So again, I hope this is making a little bit more sense as we're kind of going through it. But if we just come back to the workflow, we can see that we're changing the state of that metadata. So whatever that value is, that's returned. Just again, if we come back into the design, we can see we're putting the state that we just changed, which is returned from Pinecone. So yeah, guys, I hope this makes a little bit more sense. Again, this is kind of just the start of it. Obviously, there's kind of more, it can get pretty intricate pretty fast from this. For instance, let's say you want to upload documents, right? Large documents. And then you would have to, first parse it and then chunk it. There's more complex things that I want to get into as well. Again, I definitely recommend you check out my LangChain video, but just from the start really quick, we're essentially, this is kind of the whole process of everything. We're just turning our query into a one-dimensional vector. This is what a computer can read and understand. And then we're turning our context into this. And then we're also turning our query into this. So now imagine if you had a document with, a shit ton of data, like a lot of data. So now from whatever the user asks, it would find whatever the query that's most similar to this, and compare it with that. Now, obviously, that's kind of the reason why you would chunk stuff. So you don't take up the whole document, which can get it's pretty cost prohibitive, and second of all, you're kind of limited to the token usage, which I believe is like 8,000 with GPT-4. I could be wrong on that, don't quote me, but yeah. So essentially from here, what we would do then is whatever is returned, we would then plug that into another prompt, which is called a two-shot prompt or something similar to that. But yeah, you can kind of see how everything kind of plays together. But I definitely do think that the embeddings and the similarity search that we're doing with Pinecone is the start of kind of understanding this more at a kind of high-level overview as we develop more intricate things, which is actually what I want to do in the next video. Essentially, take the value, the metadata that's returned from here, and then plug it into another prompt, such as GPT-4, to get us that response. So yeah, guys, I hope this has helped you. If it has, definitely leave a like, or if you have ideas of other videos you want to see, or anything like that, leave that in the comments. Or if you have any questions, let me know in the comments as well. We also have a Discord that I just launched completely for free. I'm pretty active in there as well, so I'll leave the link to that in there. So yeah, thank you guys.